In Gamblers Anonymous, we call it the dream world of the gambler. It didn't matter whatever personal circumstances I had before I walked into the bookmakers. As I crossed that threshold, the world was my oyster. And literally, whatever problem I had, I thought I could put right by gambling. Win or lose, that's the strange thing about compulsive gambling. I owed loads of money to various people that I had to dodge. I owed money to money lenders that you've got to pay back. I'm into money lenders for thousands of pounds. And that's why I do the spiritual practices with such force. I'm sort of 29 years without a bet, 25 years clean. I do all this stuff on a daily basis.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode, I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction, and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Steve. Hi, fellow 12-steppers. Welcome to this new edition of 12 Steps and 12 Questions. I'm really looking forward to this episode today, as with a fellow from Gamblers Anonymous. These episodes really allow me to grow and also reach different people with different addictions who share the same solution. And with that, let's get to my guest for today, Steve. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Silvio. My name's Steve. I'm a compulsive gambler and I'm also a recovered drug addict. My date of last bet was the 11th of May, 1996. So I hadn't had a bet in 29 years. And the date of my last drug and drink was on the 25th of July, 1996. So I'm 25 years clean and sober.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh, thank you, Steve. This is really, really inspiring. You know, it's a lot of sobriety there and a lot of abstinence, you know. So let's get to the 12 questions that I ask every guest on this podcast. Question one is, Steve, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
For sure. I was brought up in a household that was addictive. It was dysfunctional. My father had stopped drinking in 1947, but had no program of recovery at all. And was, in my view, a dry drunk. And he was, he had an unpredictable temper. He was a violent man. Both me and my sister will tell you exactly the same story. We're both in recovery. My mum was emotionally unavailable. She was actually a teacher, but she did nothing to stop my dad and his violence and his aggression. And she'd always come to us afterwards. My dad would go into one and he'd beat us up, and she'd come to us afterwards and say, your dad loves you.
Oh.
And it's a mixed message. I see that in hindsight, that violence and love then become intertwined. And
yeah.
I just, the house was an unsafe space for me. I remember just standing outside the front door wondering whether to go in or to not. I could say something on Tuesday and everybody would laugh, and I could say the same thing on Wednesday and I'd get clumped. And, as a 7-8-year-old, it was unsafe. My sister actually took the brunt of it. My sister will tell you the same story because she was older, but she saved me on a few occasions. She'd see my dad about to get aggressive and she'd jump in and stop him and he'd just bash her instead.
Yeah.
Could I put it into context though? It sounds quite stark, doesn't it?
No, I think you should. I think it's really important that we do this. Yes, carry on.
And I think the context kind of helps in terms of looking for forgiveness as well and giving forgiveness, which is important in recovery. And so my dad was he grew up in the Depression, the 30s. He came to London. He's Welsh, or he was Welsh. He's passed. He came to London in the 30s looking for work. He fought in the Second World War. He was a Normandy veteran. He landed on D-Day and he fought his way across Europe, and he was part of the liberation of Berlin. I have no idea what he saw.
Yeah, he's a survivor.
Yeah, and I would guess, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't big in those days. He was never diagnosed with it, but I would guess that's what he was suffering from. And to put my mum into context, Well, she grew up in Custom House, one of the most deprived areas in London's East End, and she was part of the Blitz. The Blitz would have been happening when she was probably, I don't know, 10, 11. So she was evacuated a couple of times from East London. Why would that not be traumatic? 11 or 12-year-old. And I think if you put all that in context, then I can begin to see why they were like they were.
It's so important that we do this, that we don't just sort of say, oh, this is what happened, and therefore, they're bad people or anything like that. Not at all. You speak of forgiveness. It's funny, we were just speaking, I was just on a meeting and we were speaking just about forgiveness. And my father, not dissimilar, I think, to yours, was violent at times, so it was a bit of a situation also with my sister, predominantly actually with my sister, and I threw myself into the breach, so to speak, every once in a while to say, no, stop, and all that. And it was very upsetting. It's incredibly upsetting. And I share this sense of like, sometimes you just don't know where you're at with this, things seem to be good. And then out of nowhere, all hell breaks loose. And I remember that this was quite a particular time in our lives, and then eventually it sort of stopped. It sounds to me like you had more of it, as it were. But I had to do the same thing, and this is what our steps 4 and 5. I mean, I'm sort of going a bit further here than I should maybe, but nonetheless, because you brought the context, and it's a really beautiful thing to say. That's what our steps 4 and 5 are for, aren't they? Is that I'm able to sort of find the forgiveness and context. Same for my father. He was a post-war child, really. He grew up in one of the poorest areas of Italy. I know that he almost starved on one occasion because he was snowed into this in this house somewhere out in the mountains, and he didn't make it back into the village on time, and certain things that he saw and lived through, and that generation had no way of dealing with these things. There was no awareness around this. Yeah. What beautifully said. Thank you so much, Steve.
I was kind of lucky in that, because my sister had come into recovery before me. She actually showed me the way. She would chat to me about my mum, and she would say pleasant things about my mum, and I'd sit there going, how can this be? This woman treated you like a dog.
Yeah.
And then after a couple of years, it wasn't instant with me. Like after 2 or 3 years, the penny dropped. My sister was saying these things because it put her into that sense of freedom.
Yeah.
And she was freeing herself by being polite. And then I began to understand, the forgiveness process. So I was lucky. I was blessed that way.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Steve. Our question 2: what at the moment you first got hooked / the fun times? What did that look like? Now, I'll leave you to just answer the question. I know that you're part of 2 different fellowships, and but I'll just leave you to answer the question whichever way you see fit.
It's interesting, and it's interesting you let me answer it in the 2 ways, Silvio, because there's 2 different answers. So I've got no euphoric recall about drugs. Drugs very simply made it all right to be me. Before I took them, I was restless, irritable, and discontented. I started taking drugs at 13. My sister served up to me as it happened. Why would she not?
Yes, as you do.
And then straight away, it was all right to be me. And all of a sudden I fitted in that separation that I felt, that disconnection. All of a sudden drugs made me connected. And that's what I wanted from drugs. However, with gambling, definite euphoric recall. And in Gamblers Anonymous, we call it the dream world of the gambler, or the fantasy world of the gambler. And with me, this was all pre-internet, so I've never gambled on the internet. This was about going to dog tracks and going into bookmakers. And it didn't matter whatever personal circumstances I had before I walked into the bookmakers. As I crossed that threshold, the world was my oyster. I got a sense of ease and comfort just by walking across the threshold. People knew my name in there, and we often hear people talk in the fellowships about I have arrived. And that was it. I'd walk in there, I have arrived. People knew my name. People would start talking about the horses. There was a paper at the time called Sporting Life. No idea whether it still exists, but every self-respecting gambler read the Sporting Life, because that's where the form was for the dogs and the horses, a bit of football. The woman behind the jump, she knew my name as I was writing out the betting slip. And literally, whatever problem I had, I thought in my deluded mind, in this dream world of the compulsive gambler, I thought I could put right by gambling in that moment. Win or lose, that's the strange thing about compulsive gambling. It doesn't matter what you lose, you're still going to bet. And the reality is that's why we call it the dream world, is because when I came out of that bookmakers, then I was back to the reality of my life. I owed loads of money to various people that I had to dodge. I owed money to money lenders that you've got to pay back, and I'd be going back and I'd do all my wages. In those days, you got paid in money.
Yeah.
Transfer, you get a wage packet coming off a building site, and I had nothing left. And not only had I nothing left, I'd actually subbed up into the following week to pay for the drugs and the gambling.
Yeah. Let's slow this down for a second. I love this idea of what you were saying, that you had arrived, the moment you walk into the betting shop or the dog track. I remember, the dealer's car pulling up, and I'm already starting to feel, everything's going to be all right. You know what I mean? You get in the car and he's like, hey, how you been? They know your name. They will know what you want, and all the rest of it. Maybe there's a special deal on, and you're already starting to feel like, oh God, things are a lot better now, aren't they? Really? Take us a little bit into that world that you talked about. So what you're walking in with, whatever it is that you have on your mind, it's been a tough week, or maybe, you had an argument with your girlfriend or something, and you're walking into the betting shop, and what it did for you that you couldn't do for yourself.
Yeah, it was it was literally like a light switch. Whatever the problem was, it was irrespective. As I walked across that threshold and started to see people I knew, started to see people crowded around the sporting life, whatever they were doing, as I walked across that threshold, it changed instantly. And I began to relax, that sense of ease and comfort. I'd literally forgotten all those problems that we obsess about, isn't it, as we were walking down the street. They'd literally gone. And then straight away, the world is my oyster. Anything can happen in this betting shop. In my deluded mind, it's a delusional thinking. That's why we call it the dream world. Who knows? I might even put, if you're familiar with betting, a
little bit.
I might lay down a Yankee. That Yankee. Bear in mind, I'm not a big time gambler, so I was a compulsive gambler, but I didn't have a lot of money, so I might be doing a Yankee on a pound. So I wasn't a guy walking in with £5,000 and put it on a single race. That is now a bet. I'd probably been going down the settee before just to find like a few loose coppers down the settee, so I could have a bet.
Yeah,
I probably hedged a bit of money on the way in. Perhaps I've talked to a woman in the shop next door. Give us 10 shillings was a lot of money. 50p was a lot of money in those days. Give us 10 shillings for the Yankee. I'll cut you into the winnings and all that sort of stuff. But it was just a world of opportunity in it, completely delusional, because none of it was backed up by experience. It wasn't as though I'd ever walked into that shop and had a massive win. And I'd been in and out of that bookmakers for years, and I'd never had the big win that people talked about. So I don't know why I thought, but that is the, Mark Houston used to talk about it, the theatre of the lie, isn't it? My own mind.
Yeah.
And that was it. My own mind created this delusional world that would lie to me.
So contrary to what, popular belief, I suppose, especially, amongst people who are not in the rooms and things, it's actually not really about money at all, is it?
It's not. It's about compulsive gambling. It's literally about, and that's the hopelessness of the addict, isn't it? Is even when, I'm into money lenders for thousands of pounds, I genuinely can't afford this. My mental health has started to deteriorate. The drugs aren't working. The gambling is, I've still got to go and have a bet. I can remember, same as walking past a crack house. I remember walking past the crack house, don't go in. Then I'm in.
You're in.
Same with the bookmakers. Don't go in. You haven't got any money. Don't go in the bet today. And then I'm in there and I'm filling out the betting slip. But that, the obsession, we talk about the mental obsession, but it's when the obsession turns to compulsion.
Yeah.
That's the issue starts. And I was actually compelled to bet against my will.
Yeah. Did you have any idea at some point that this was problematic?
I did, both for drugs, probably more for drugs than for gambling, as it happened, because of that dream world of the gambler. And what I decided, in terms of consequences, I decided to, we we call it in the in East London, we call it going the limit. I had decided that whatever happened to me, I was going to stay on this path. This was the decision I'd made. I was quite clearly a drug addict, and that's what I was going to do. And all the consequences that occurred to me that happened to all addicts, I wasn't bothered about, because I'm absolutely obsessed and committed to taking drugs. With the gambling, it was different. It was just, I'd go in there, even when I didn't get a sense of ease and comfort, I was still compelled to. But I suppose it's where we talk about the false becomes real, isn't it? That we all of a sudden the unacceptable becomes acceptable. So it was absolutely acceptable to me to be tens of thousands of pounds into moneylenders. And if you don't know, I mean, obviously you've got to pay moneylenders back. It's not like the bank where perhaps you can knock them or come to an agreement with you. With moneylenders, they want their money back. But if you can't pay back, you have to go and work for them.
Right. Okay.
You have to go and do what they say. And that was it. I was never going to fight against, I'm not a tough guy. You're either a tough guy or you're not. And I'm absolutely.
No, that's right. Yeah.
So I was never going to get into rows with moneylenders. I had to do what they said. And that was acceptable to me, to be controlled by moneylenders. Yeah. It's not in hindsight, by the way.
So this is where our question 3 comes in, really, which is, what were your worst consequences and finally your rock bottom? Now, let's focus a bit on the gambling, if you don't mind. You've already started talking about it there. This is quite serious stuff. You're in a lot of debt, and debt is crippling, right? And I know this from experience. Debt, not even gambling debt, just regular, quote unquote, debt, right, can be crippling. It's in poverty. It can be like an illness. It pervades your entire life, everything, your everyday. So it's a serious situation. How did it develop from there?
So a couple of things is that I normalized it. And if you come from areas, and I've talked to guys who've come from dock areas and other places, like in Glasgow, with the River Clyde and that, and moneylenders are a way of life in the pubs. Every pub will have a moneylender. They're attached to families. That's how it works. If you pay them back out of your wages, that's what happens. And the moneylenders would wait for you. Like on a Thursday, you'd get paid. I'd come off the building sites. I was a hod carrier in those days as a bricklayer's labourer, and they'd be waiting for you, and they want their money back, because that's where they, closely followed by my wife, because she wants some money as well, because they all know that I'm about to go, either going to the drug dealer or I'm going to the bookies. They all want their money first, and I'm left with about £5. I was a 10 bob millionaire, as I used to say. that normalised it, because everybody I knew used moneylenders. I didn't. And all of a sudden that becomes acceptable. But the consequences, so the worst consequences for me weren't physical ones. And it may have been because I came from a family who included addicts, that all those consequences weren't part of normal life. So breakup of relationships, losing jobs, getting arrested, getting sectioned, getting shot up with like Ectal. A lot of my family, that happened to them. Growing up, some of my family was in and out of prison. My dad had been in and out of military prison. So consequences were all part of the life that we led.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really bothered about physical consequences. But what got to me, and it's regardless of the symptom of the illness now, regardless of whether it was gambling or drugs, was the emotional consequences. Because when they both stopped working, I'm left with the spiritual malady. I'm left with me and the world and the spiritual malady. And the emotional pain absolutely crippled me. And that's really what brought me into the fellowships, was that emotional pain. I would lie on the bed and just that emotional pain. They call it the silent scream. I don't know if you've ever come across that term before. It was like my mind was torturing me to death. And that's what I would say to people. And you can't live that way. I mean, it's impossible to live that way. And all I could think about was suicide. And literally I became, probably from the late 80s, and I came into the fellowships in 94. I became obsessed by suicide. And I would walk past a tall building and think, blimey, I could jump off that building. I would pick out places on the railway tracks where I could just jump out in front of trains. I would look at the tree that I'm going to hang myself from. And ultimately, if you think like that, you will try and do it. And I had probably 2 or 3, not cries for help. full-on attempts at suicide, and as you can see, I was a failure at that as well, Sylvia. I wasn't very good at killing myself, but though perhaps God had other plans for me. You know, I'd like to think God had other plans for me, but
I'd like to think so.
Please God. And I came close to death a couple of times, as people do when they try and commit suicide. Interestingly enough, for all those thoughts about jumping off high buildings and trains, if you're a drug addict, the only way you're going to do it is with drugs, isn't it? It's like drug overdose because it's the easiest way of doing it.
Yeah.
And I would say that like medication, and I'd throw a bit of street drugs on top of it, and it didn't work. And I was in a coma for like 2-3 days. And when I woke up, I was disappointed not to be dead.
Yeah. You've just answered our question 4, which is, did you ever want to die? Did you consider suicide? So clearly you did. I remember the first time I stopped doing drugs in my mid-20s. I was about 25. And I went, instead of going for help, and I didn't know about the rooms, or I didn't think that they were for me. I was pretty clueless, really. And I went through a long stretch of very, very dark depression, very dark. And I remember that place of continuously, as you were saying, you're looking at tall buildings. You know, for a time I couldn't really go anywhere that wasn't a tall building or anything like that. For fear, I would throw myself off. I remember there was a time where I would find it so difficult taking the tube or whatever, because every time the tube carriage arrives, you know, I'm thinking, well, I can just literally just one step and I'm gone, you know, and it's all over. And it's a awful place to be at, and I was in that for years, actually, you know, and then thankfully got better rather than worse. But and I always say this at this point, if you listener, if this is where you are today, if this is the way you feel, there is help available. We're talking about it because we have found a solution, thankfully, that has worked for us and keeps working for us. There is a way out of this pain. And if you are in that pain right now, please seek help. It is available and it's worth it. I just wanted to make sure that everybody gets that and everybody hears that. Our question 5. What other methods did you try to get sober before finding the rooms? Sober/abstinent.
Yeah, probably same with gambling or drugs. It's just trying to stop by myself. You know, and with the gambling, it's it's like gambling every other day. I'll tell you what, I'll only gamble at weekends, and it's pretty much like with the drugs, isn't it? Okay, if I can use drugs on Saturday and Sunday, I won't use them during the week. But you know, when you're powerless over addiction, when you're a hopeless addict, okay, you might do that for the first weekend, but by the time you come into Wednesday, Thursday, the pain's back on you, you're restless, irritable and discontented, and the addiction will take you wherever it takes you. So the addiction would either take me back to drugs, or it would take me back to gambling, or it would take me back to both. You know, I would do both. It would just depend what it was. And so it never worked. And, you know, you've heard this a million times in the rooms. I could stop, but I couldn't stay stopped. That was it. And, you know, I'd come off the gear for a few days and people would say I was looking better. You know, my eyes were getting clear, but the problem centers in the mind, and then the mind would take me back.
I was just sort of compelled to ask what the relationship is between those two addictions for you. I'm just ever so slightly off script and away from the questions, but what is that relationship between? Because I'm sure that, you know, once you start, or I'm assuming that once you start betting, you're going to want some gear, or once you started having some gear, you probably wanted a bet, if it's anything like my alcohol and drug addiction.
It depends on the drugs. So when I first started, I was big into speed. Canning Town, over in East London, I used to say that was the best speed in Britain. Now I don't know if I knew that because I didn't take speed all over Britain, but you know that was my view. And so blues. But so to go to the dog track, say to go to Crayford or go down to Wimbledon, wherever, Walthamstow, wherever it may be, full of blues, full of sulphate, full of speed. But I have and I'd be suited and booted in those days. This was probably quite early on. You know, fantastic. You know, I have arrived, and I'd be with a group of blokes doing exactly the same thing, and we'd be giving it large. So the two would dovetail together. But by the time I'm smoking heroin, and if you smoked heroin, you know yourself, if you're doing that, then you're gouging out.
You ain't going nowhere.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I'm not going to the bookmakers, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You know, and so sometimes I would give up drugs by going gambling, if that makes sense.
Yes, of
It's
course.
transference, isn't it? It's just swapping deck chairs on the Titanic, as we say. But it seemed a good idea at the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember trying various combinations of this for me, sort of between just drinking or just cocaine or whatever else I was using. And it was always an absolute disaster in that, yeah, right, I might have made it through the night, with just gear, and then it's 4 a.m. in the morning and I'm just lying there in bed and my heart is going 100 miles a minute. And I just felt it was just such an awful experience, right? I needed both. I needed the alcohol to then calm me down, and then eventually it would just kind of escalate. And the other way around as well, I would just drink, and then I'd just be drunk really quickly because I'm quite a lightweight, really, and then I was just pining for gear, sort of to get me out of that spot. And I always trying to find that sort of balance between the two, and and then eventually it was just a car without brakes, as I always say. The brake pads had worn, and I was just driving, and it was just until I crashed.
Yeah, it's just a chaotic lifestyle. Whatever the symptom of the illness is, your lifestyle becomes chaotic.
Yeah.
And if you're anything like me, I just went with it.
Yeah.
I'd literally given up and just like, okay, it's chaos. That's the way my life is.
It's what the book talks about, isn't it? It's about sort of having that choice between either a spiritual life or, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation, and he had chosen the former. I had chosen the former as well.
Let's go on to the bitter end. Let's roll the dice. I'll take what happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really, I don't care what happens.
Yeah, you're a gambler at heart.
Supreme non-caring, isn't it? I'm so much in that world of one. As long as my needs are met in that instance, that's what I'm going to do. I don't care about the consequences.
Yeah, indeed so.
We'll deal with that when they happen.
Our question 6. When you then came into the rooms, did you struggle with the word God?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was a committed atheist.
Right.
I can absolutely prove to you there was no God. And it was the desperation. So when when I was, obviously I met Jimmy, my sponsor. What I'd tell you about that is because in hindsight, of course, I can see that was God. Jimmy I'd known for 10 years before I'd ever come into the rooms.
Right.
So in this psychosis, when I came into CA in 94 and NA, I didn't trust anybody.
Mm.
When you're psychotic, I was diagnosed as frankly psychotic. Why would you trust anybody? But I trusted Jim because I'd had a million conversations with Jim. And Jim, over the years, he'd asked me to come into the rooms. I'd always said no.
How did you know him?
I met him. We were doing, so his father-in-law, his dad rather, was on the tunnels, and he worked with my father-in-law.
Right.
They were what was known as tunneling foremen, and there's only a few of them in the country. So I won't say their names. People
No, of course not.
Yeah, but so they knew each other, and we met. And obviously, I was talking about my father-in-law, and he goes, "That's strange. My dad works with him. They work together on the Victoria line."
Yeah. Is it odd or is it God?
Yeah, absolutely. Is it odd or God? And so when I came into the rooms, Jimmy was armed with the facts.
Yeah.
And he was a committed Catholic. I hope he wouldn't mind me. I don't see why he'd mind me saying that.
No, of course not.
And he'd talk about it. So I'd go searching for God. I was searching for this higher power, that I didn't believe in. And Jimmy would, so I'd go to people like Bethnal Green, the Buddhist Centre. I'd go on Alpha courses. I'd get the Quran out of the library and, try and get to all this stuff.
Proper seeking.
Yeah, absolutely. Seeking God. And Jimmy would always say to me, what you come looking for, you come looking with. And I had no idea what he was talking about. Do you know what I mean? And I was too proud to ask him. Do you ever do that with your sponsor where you just nod and the little voice of the back of your mind goes, what's he on about?
Yeah,
But pride stops me from going, I don't know what you're talking about, Jim. So I'd always nod and, yeah, I know what you mean, and all that stuff. And what he was really saying was deep down inside all of us is that fundamental belief in God.
Yeah.
And he said, and what he was really saying to me is that's what the program's about. And Jim was very encouraging. He'd always say to me, you don't need to do that, Steve. I'd say I'm going off to Bethnal Green. But he said, that's great. He said, I'm sure it'll aid your recovery, but you don't need to do that.
Yeah.
He said, you'll find the answers in the program.
Yeah.
no point taking good advice, is there? If you're a drug addict, if you're a recovering addict, why would I take good advice?
Of course, you know best.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When you've got an ego as big as mine, when you're running on self-will, I'll sort this out myself.
Yeah. It's an eternal, and that is an eternal battle, actually. Certainly for me, it is. Even today, to just, oh, here's something that I need to sort out. Already, the thought I need to sort out. So let me just try and do that, and then after trying and failing, many times kind of go, maybe it's not for me to sort out. Maybe I should just turn over.
Yeah, that's really what happened to me is when I became desperate enough, then I began to contemplate there might even be a power that's greater than Steve Phillips.
Yeah, who knew?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, how could that possibly be true? But the great thing about drugs is they'll either kill you or they'll bash you into a state of reasonableness, isn't it?
Yeah, well, indeed so.
And please God, it didn't kill me, but it bashed me into that state of reasonableness where I've gone, do you know what? I am going to believe what these people in the rooms are saying to me. And I'd been in the rooms 5 years before that. So I came in 94, but I didn't stay stopped from drugs until 99.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. And that is such an amazing message to those people who come into the rooms, get a taste, go back out. This isn't a linear process without contradictions or without 2 steps forward and 1 step back. On the contrary, it can be, and it often is, in one way or another, quite messy, it can be, especially the early days, they're quite confusing. Just as our illness is confusing, sometimes our recovery can be a bit confusing, and you do really well for a certain time, and then unbeknownst to you, somehow you've slacked somewhere, or there's certain bits of the program that you weren't committed to, and they will show up and they will get you, and it's a great message. Even if you've done this in and out 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, there is always, the program is always there, and it'll work for you if you stick with it.
And I suppose in reality, Silvio, I had nowhere else to go. Yeah. Everybody on the outside was sick of me. What used to baffle me was that I went to Gamblers Anonymous in 96 and I never gambled again.
Wow.
I have never had a bet since my first meeting, but that isn't the way it was in Cocaine Anonymous. And I can tell you about sitting in rooms, just thinking I'm the only person not getting this, sitting at the back of a meeting, and everybody else seemed to be getting clean except me. But the reality is the people who were getting clean were doing the do. They were doing the work. People ask me why that's the case. And the truth is I don't know, because I'm powerless over my addiction. Addiction will tell me when I stop gambling and when I stop using gear. And when I went back to drugs in 99, I didn't gamble. I've no idea why that is. I don't know, but that's why I'm powerless over my addiction. But the surrenders were different. So the surrender, have I got time to tell you about the surrendering gamblers? Right. So I was a couple of years clean in CA and NA, predominantly from 94 to 96, but I'm still gambling. And I owe probably in 96, something like £30,000, something like that, to Moneylend.
It's a lot of money in 96.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's a lot of money in 2025. Isn't it?
Certainly is, absolutely.
It's just more, yeah. And, and I'm going around meetings of NA and CA going, I'm free. I am free, but I'm doing absolutely everything the money lenders tell me because I don't want to get beaten up. I don't want to get bashed up. And I'm sitting in a meeting one night in AA, and I'm sharing about how I put £500 on West Ham United to win the FA Cup in 1996, and we'd gone out to Grimsby Town. Nobody loses to Grimsby Town, do they? Certainly not West Ham. So I'm moaning about this. I'm in the meeting, and there's a fella sitting in the meeting, and he's just come out of a rehab. And let me tell you, I've never seen this bloke before, and I've never seen him since. And so I'm sharing about this, and I'm going, yeah, I've got 500 quid. I've got no money left, and I better look at my gambling. And the guy interrupts me sharing, and he goes, mate, never mind, look at it. He says, you need to stop. And the meeting goes quiet because in that time I was unpredictable. I'm only a couple of years into recovery. I picked up that unpredictable violence my dad had, And the meeting was like, blimey, what's Steve going to say? But for the first time in my life, I went, do you know what, mate? I think you're absolutely right. I said, you're right. I need to stop. And fortunately, there was a guy there called Gypsy Bill. And if you can be a face in a 12-step fellowship, I'm not sure you can. But if you are, Gypsy Bill was a face in Gamblers Anonymous, very well known. I mean, he's passed now, God bless him, but he was very well known. And at the end of the meeting, he said, Steve, he said, you've got to come to Gamblers Anonymous, mate. And he said, not only that, he said, you're driving them mad. He said, you can't come down to AA talking about gambling. He said, it's against the fifth tradition. He said, they're too polite to tell you that.
Absolutely.
But he said, I'm going to tell you that. You've got to go to Gamblers Anonymous. I didn't go straight away. I had another few bets after that. But the final bet I had was on the FA Cup final on 1996. And I won.
All right.
I actually won the bet. As I always say, I won my first bet and my last bet. I just wasn't so clever in all those bets in between, you know.
Yeah.
I was a mug punter. I'll tell you a very quick story about that.
Yeah, go on.
I won £73. Right. But I was going to a meeting. It was on a Saturday afternoon, FA Cup final, 3:00 those days. So I've gone up to an NA meeting in Camberwell, and it's called Serene on the Green, or it was anyway in 96. So I've got this money and I've put it in the pot, you know, and I've shared in the meeting. I said, look, I've won this money. It's no good to me. It's not going to bring me 1 ounce of happiness whatsoever. I'm going to put it in the pot. So I did, and I put this money in. I go back the next week and the treasurer has stolen the pot. And guess who got the blame? Me. And they blamed me. They said, well, that's what happened. The guy had never seen so much money. The pot that week was something like £100. And we go back the next week and they go, well, it's you, Steve. You put your gambling winnings in. That was a stupid thing to do. I'm like, oh, yeah, of course it's my fault. But anyway, that was the last bet I had. And I hope he got some use out of the money.
Unmanageability or what? Oh God. Yeah, it just goes to, I mean, there's so much in that, you know, if you think about it, the guy who straight out of rehab, you know, who you would think doesn't have anything to contribute, yeah, quote unquote, he's the person who delivers you the message. You've never seen him again, you know, and those people who we trust with, you know, I think required clean time, I think for treasureship today is 2 years, if I remember it well, you know, and if we're unwell, and we are all unwell in the rooms, and that is something that we shall never forget, no matter how long you've been clean and sober or abstinent, we're still ill, you know, and that person, you know, does away with the money, you know, it's an incredible story. Oh, thank you, Steve. Amazing. Question 7, how do you experience your higher power today?
Nice question, and probably in 2 ways, I would guess. It is that, and I've already touched on it, is looking back, you see those coincidences, and isn't it, we say that coincidences is God in 4 syllables, isn't it? You know, the guy actually 12-stepped me was somebody I'd used with. It was a guy called Richard Howard, and Richard passed away of cancer 14 years clean. But I'd used with Richard for 5-6 years. He came into AA and CA in the end of 93. He 12-stepped me at the beginning of 94. I didn't come in straight away, and then I came in. You know, in fact, I'd known Jimmy for 10 years before I'd ever come into the fellowships, and we had that connection. That is no coincidence. So when I came in, then Jim was there, and he was armed with facts. How could I have possibly known that my sponsor was going to be armed with facts? You wouldn't know that. And, you know, people, we have all those coincidence stories, isn't it? What I found with God was that Jim was right. You know, what I come looking for, I came looking with. And Jim was absolutely right. And it's about page 55 of the book, isn't it? Deep down inside all of us, there is this fundamental belief in God. But it is obscured by pomp, calamity, and the worship of other things. And that's really what the program is there for. Just another quick story. When I used to go to Bethnal Green on a Saturday morning, and there was an old timer there who used to shout out every week, "Where do you find God?" Page 55 of the big book. And he drove me absolutely mad. They're waiting for him to say it. And I'd be like, "Oh, don't say it, don't say it." And of course he would say it because it's part of his message. And I'd go, "Oh, he drove me mad." But I wouldn't look at page 55. You know, no point. I've already said it, isn't it? And if you're a recovering addict, no point taking good advice. No point looking at page 55. Why would I want to do that? I'm rebellious. Rebellion dogs our every step. For the first 20 years, so I would say, I wouldn't look at it. When I was desperate enough, Silvio, then I looked at page 50. I was desperate enough. You know, when I never left. I came back in 99. I never left to fill up just a pain sitting in rooms. So like out on the edge. But So when I then committed to this program, to putting this program into my life, then I began to see how it really worked. And it was about, it talks about it, page 64, isn't it? We can make that decision in step 3, but we've got to do the work, because otherwise we will still be blocked. It doesn't sound like the Spirit. It doesn't actually say blocked from God, but I've always thought what it means.
Yeah.
And then as I worked this program, then I began to see that I became unblocked, and I could see what 4 and 9 was all about. It's just about getting the root to God, isn't it? It's about getting rid of the power. 10 is about doing 4 to 9 every day. And so to answer the question, how do I communicate with God? It's just part of my 10 and 11. Mark Houston used to talk about it, spiritual disciplines, the 10th and the 11th step. And quiet time to me in the morning is so important. You know, that two-way prayer, that taking my problems to God, and then literally sitting there. I sit there with a book. And I write down everything that I think. Now, obviously not everything that I think is coming straight from God. There's a load of self-will in there as well. And then go through it at the end of the scene. It might be 10, 15 minutes. And then I go through seeing what's God, what's self. And I've got an accountability group. So if I don't know, and sometimes we're obscured from the truth, isn't it? And I'll take it to my accountability group and say, would you...
Is that like a steel on steel sort of thing?
Yeah, I do 2 things. So I had a steel on steel group, which changes in its membership, because people do fall out of steel on steel. Way Mark Houston used to describe it, it was always the same 3 people. But in reality, that's not what's happened to me. And so I do steel on steel. But the accountability group is somebody that they're a group of people that I've known many, many years, a lot of them. And I send out my step 11 review I actually do it in the morning. I do the review at night. Then I look at the review in the morning about corrective measures. You know, one needs to put right today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, that's how it works, isn't it? That's what.
Very, very strong practice is what I'm hearing. You know, two-way prayer, sending out your step 11 and things. We've only recently started a steel on steel.
Right.
And
isn't it?
It's really great. It's really, really great for people who might not know what that is. It's essentially, it is also an accountability group. It's a group of people to whom you're spiritually accountable. You meet, I think, once a month is the idea. If I'm not mistaken, it's Mark H who came up with it. But, you know, I'm sure that someone will find out that it wasn't just him and then they're going to shoot me down. But, you know, the way I know it is that, you know, that's the way I was told anyway. And there's lots of good material on YouTube about it. You think Mark H actually speaking about it, and there's forms and things. And essentially you meet once a month or so, and there's questions that you answer to yourself, and you get about 10 minutes. Each person gets about 10 minutes or so to talk about where they're at with their spiritual practice, and, you know, answering questions like, you know, how often have you missed your prayer and meditation in the morning? How many meetings have you been doing? You know, and all sorts of other questions. And then the other people in the group are allowed to comment on what you said about yourself and give you suggestions to take into consideration. So they don't give advice. And you tell me, Steve, if I'm summing this up correctly, they don't give advice, you should be doing this, but they will say things like, maybe consider adding an evening meditation, that sort of thing, right? And it's really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about considerations, isn't it? It's all about putting it on to the person that you're responding to. Yeah.
Otherwise, us being addicts, you know, what would we do? We'd be telling everybody else that they're doing it wrong, and we're telling them how they should run their own recovery, you know, obviously. I mean,
in reality, people do fall out about these considerations they're asked to do. I mean, I've been doing it for years.
Yeah.
And people do. People take umbrage about what's said.
Yeah.
They never come back to the group.
It does happen, I'm sure.
You know, it's severe.
Let's get back to the questions. Our question 8. Which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
We probably already talked about it. Anything to do where I couldn't take control. Anything where I couldn't provide the answer.
Step 2 and 3, really.
Yeah. Then go to 4, 6 and 7. God's, how could God remove my defects of character? If you don't believe in God, it's a problem, isn't it? And having a spiritual awakening. I didn't really believe in spiritual awakenings. My mantra was, it's my problem, I will sort it. And so really, and there was in all fairness, and I'm not, well, I probably am self-justifying, but there was a phrase in AA at the time of take what you need and leave the rest. You don't really hear that in CA. You'll hear it in GA all the time, by the way. And that's what I did. That was music to my ears. If you're running on self-will, that's fantastic, isn't it? Take the lead and leave the rest. But the 12 steps doesn't work that way.
No.
So anything where I could impose self-will, and the 12 steps don't work. They're like the spokes of a wheel, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
12 into your life, and I wouldn't say you're wasting your time, but pretty much you're wasting your time.
Yeah. It's definitely not going to work properly if you take out. I've tried this, taking out step 3. I've often spoken about this, and a massive spiritual relapse about a year or so in, punching walls, all the rest of it, because, I thought something was not right. And then, and I thought I wanted to throw the baby out with the bathwater and all the rest of it. And thankfully came to my senses and did the steps again. I had a new experience, and here we are, but I've tried that, taking out a spoke out of the wheel.
What's interesting about this, intellectually, of course, I could tell you all about what moral psychology was. I could tell you what a psychic change was intellectually and a spiritual awakening, but emotionally I couldn't.
Yeah.
Emotionally I had no idea because I hadn't experienced it.
Yeah. Well, it is an experiential program. That's just the whole point of it. Absolutely. Yeah.
But intellectually I'd disregarded it.
I see that quite a bit, and it's a tendency that I've seen in myself too. I have to put my hand up here. It's sometimes speaking above my spiritual pay grade, and talking about things, using a lot of jargon, lingo, stuff from the book, whatever stuff that we pick up on. But have I really actually made that experience that I'm talking about? It's always a valid question to answer.
Well, it's really, and I was talking about the two different surrenders, if you like. The surrender was different in GA as it was to CA.
Yeah.
In terms of drugs, I was sitting in a secure hospital. I was under a mental health order in 1999, as I had been for a number of years, and something happened and I got recalled into the system. I don't know why I stopped on that particular day.
Yeah.
So I'd been in and out of, I've been in care in the community for something like 10 years. I've been in and out of these places. So to me to be sitting in a mental health centre wasn't particularly, what else would you do on a Thursday morning? Seems like a thing to do. And I was sitting there, and I don't know why I got clean on that day and stay stopped. And obviously I could never have known I was going to stay stopped up till today. Please God, it continues.
Yeah.
I was going to stay stopped on that day. But I remember I was sitting in this antechamber to go in this room to go in and see this forensic psychologist. And I just had that step 1 experience.
Yeah.
I fully conceded to my inner myself. I had that moment of clarity. I often talk about it. It's the longest journey, isn't it? From the head to the heart.
That's right. Yeah.
And all of a sudden I felt it in my heart that I was an addict. And if I kept doing what I was doing, guess what? I was going to keep using. And from that day in 1999, I believed it's always going to be a spiritual answer. The answer doesn't lie with Steve Phillips. The answer lies with God. And all of a sudden I was desperate enough to become, and I've talked about it earlier, I was desperate enough to become open to God.
Maybe it's the thing about Thursday mornings. I overdosed on a Thursday morning for my step 1 experience. So yeah, I don't know. Who knows?
That's from the weekend, isn't it?
I don't know. Question 9. Which character defects give you most trouble?
Self-pity. Self-pity, without a doubt. My default position, and fueled, of course, by self-delusion and self-centeredness, because quite clearly the world must be just concentrating on Steve Phillips. What else has the universe got to do but think about me, isn't it? Self-pity. And the world isn't treating me right. And that is absolutely my default position on any given day. And that's why I do the spiritual practices with such force, why I'm so robust about it, because I'm so imperfect. If I don't mind drinking drugs or gambling, the problem is me, and it's the spiritual maladies in myself. And I've just found the spiritual malady is so strong. That's why I need to start the day with step 11.
Yeah.
Into God, asking, please remove my wrong thinking motives. Please direct my thinking, and away you go with the step 11 framework. But and then it's about spot check inventory. I love pause when in doubt or agitated, so I do 11 before 10. So I don't know about you, but I rush into my day, and I can be just naturally. I'm a very reactive person. I'm not a person that pauses by nature.
Yeah, me neither, to be fair. No.
I'm going to react to that quickly. Let's get it out of the way. We'll go on to the next thing. But the 10 and 11, the framework, has given me that ability to pause. And when I can pause, then I can move into 10. And as Mark Houston, and apologies for being a Mark Houston groupie, by the way.
No, not at all.
But you can see that I was really influenced by him. And then he talked about watch, pray, turn. And then I could see the defects. But I need to take that pause, and then I can see how selfish and self-centered I am, driven by 100 forms of fear, self-seeking, self-delusion, and self-pity. And then I can pray for that to be removed. And then I turn my thoughts to others. What am I going to do? Have I got to make amends? Have I got to speak to somebody else? Am I going to go and help somebody else? But underlying all this stuff, and I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times in the room, is self-centered fear.
Yeah.
It's all driven by self-centered fear, isn't it? Self-centered fear is the chief activator of my defects. You know, what fear is prevalent? And there's the three fears, isn't there? The fear of losing something I've got, the fear of not getting something I want or I think I should have, and that fear of discovery. And all those three things can drive me, and especially that fear of discovery or not getting something I think I should have. Then if I don't get it, the world's not treating me right. Poor old Steve Phillips. And I don't know if this helps, because obviously I'm sort of, 29 years without a bet, 25 years clean. I do all this stuff on a daily basis. These character defects have not been removed, sign, die, or forever. I come back in the morning and I start this stuff all over again.
You wake up untreated. I wake up untreated. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely. And ask my wife, if what I show up as, at the breakfast table, if I got up on time, right, and I've had enough time to meditate, to write my gratitude list, to pray, to really go there and then come back. Or if for whatever reason I got up late, I'm in a rush, did all my stuff in a rush. The difference is just, you'd have to be blind not to see it, right? I wake up untreated every morning and I need treatment every day. He's absolutely right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We're like-minded.
Yeah, indeed so. Same illness. Question 10. What is the best thing recovery has given you?
Good question. It's given me so much, but I would just on first thoughts, my gut reaction is it's all right to be me.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it's all right. I can be authentic.
Yeah.
Exactly why I used drugs in the first place was that I didn't fit in. It wasn't all right to be me. I wasn't part of. I was always on the outside looking in. Well, I don't need drugs or gambling for that. I've now got God. Leaning into the power of God. That all of a sudden it's all right to be me, and it's all right because if I'm going to be my authentic self, not everybody's going to like me, and that's quite difficult for people who are natural self-seeking people pleasers, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
There's an element of I've got to grow up, I've got to become emotionally mature, I've got to start getting emotional sobriety, as we talk about. It's not just about staying away from drugs or staying away from the first bet. It is about how do I grow up in recovery.
Yeah.
And the program has allowed me to do that. And it's allowed me to change. So what defines me is not what happened to me as a child. It's not what I did as a young man. And like everybody, I did some terrible things.
Yeah.
What defines me is what I do today and how I've helped people. What am I doing today to help somebody else? That's what defines me. And the beauty of the fellowships is, it gives you that peace of mind, isn't it? So instead of, not all the time, but I can get that peace of mind, that serenity, where then I can start, instead of thinking about myself on that washing machine head that's all about me and my problems, all of a sudden it quietens down the moral psychology it talks about in Doctor's Opinion. Right, well, let's go out and help somebody else. That's where I'm going to find true happiness. If you ask me that question, how am I going to find true happiness in the world? Help somebody else. It's not about driving a Bentley or owning a mansion or all these stuff, and I've got all that stuff. I've got all the material things. I've been blessed in that way. Fantastic. And what I love is that freedom is you go out and help people. And then those people you help, some of them may become your friends. I have people in this, and obviously I've been around 31 years, but I've got, so I know a few people, and I know people who love me unconditionally. And for the first time in my life, I have found people who I understand what unconditional love is, putting the children aside now. Yeah. But because that's just a natural nature thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, people outside my family, I have found unconditional love, and I love them unconditionally. And I see them, and they tell me the truth. They are part of my accountability group. And I'll mention, I won't mention any names, but there's people I've known for 30 years.
Yeah.
And there's a frankness about us. We can say anything to each other. I can ring them up at 3:00 in the morning and have no problem in terms of pride. And that's the beautiful thing. As God entered my heart. And when we talk about how do I feel God these days? How do I experience God? For sure, we do the spiritual framework. But what happened to me? I was so bitter and twisted. I forget sometimes how angry I was against the world.
Yeah.
I hated the world and everybody in it. But as I worked this program, that bitterness, that anger, that bile was replaced by love, forgiveness, tolerance, patience. And that was God entering my heart.
Yeah.
And the real fact of this life, isn't it? If I'm cool with me, then I'll be cool with you.
Definitely.
If I hate me, I'm going to hate the world. But so recovery's given me that beautiful thing through God's love. I can love myself, and at that, then I can reflect that to other people. And it's given me a fantastic life. I've had my share of life. I don't want to be one of those people that says I've never had a bad day in recovery. I've had terrible days in. Of course you have.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
It's life, isn't it?
Yeah, no, for sure. But you didn't drink on it, you didn't use on it, and you didn't bet on it.
It's a program for living in Ruscoe.
Yeah, indeed so.
Page 15. Bill was right. Bill actually told us the truth. That's my experience. Bill wasn't lying about that. There will be low spots ahead, and this program absolutely comes into play in those low spots. And thank God for that.
Indeed so. Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
Are they in a meeting?
Either in a meeting or outside of a meeting.
Right. Because if they're in a meeting, it's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Because I always say to people, look, people who don't have problems with gambling or drugs don't come to meetings. People who bet too much, they've just put too much money on the Grand National, they stop. And that's all they think to themselves, I'm never doing that again, and they never do it again. Yeah. So if you've actually come to a meeting, my experience, I'm not a great fan of this thing about we don't have hopeless addicts and we don't have real alcoholics and all that stuff. If people come to a meeting, it's because they've got a genuine desire to stop.
Yeah.
And so if it's in a meeting, I'd almost say to them, look, if you don't get what you need at this meeting, here's a where to find. You've got hundreds of meetings. There's meetings online these days. It's a wonderful thing. Go to as many meetings as you need to go to. And I promise you faithfully, if you're one of us, you will hear what you need to hear. Keep your bum on the seat. Don't leave the meetings. If it's outside the meetings, I probably just chatting to people. I probably go through that. It's page 44 of the book. I'm an old man, by the way. So if I get the pages wrong, I'm quite happy to be told I'm getting them wrong. But page 45, I think
it's rather about the content than the page number. Anyone can look up a page number. So go on to page 44, probably.
So maybe, perhaps. Fingers crossed. It's page 44, and he talks about this is an illness, about lack of choice. We've lost the power of choice. We've lost the power of control, and that's normally what I speak to people about. And if I talk to them about the physical allergy, about the mental obsessions. You always go back when you don't want to do it. Once you've started, can you stop? Can you just stop gambling? Once you've written out that betting slip, can you stop once you're on the crack pipe? And if they can't, well, it's probably they're going to need a spiritual experience. It's going to treat their illness. And here's the good news. We can give you that spiritual experience. We have the solution in Cocaine Anonymous. We have, I'll just little proviso on that. They've rewritten the steps in Gamblers Anonymous.
Oh.
So they don't have a spiritual, it drives me mad. They don't have a spiritual awakening.
In step 12?
Yeah, they've taken out, there's God in, they've rewritten the steps. And so they're not looking for people to have a spiritual awakening. And he says something like, having done this work, we try and take the message to other gamblers. And it's probably because in the rooms, and both of these are valid, is because it's gambling, it's a behavioural issue as well as a hopeless addict. So I'd say half the people in GA have behavioural problems and they're not hopeless addicts, but that's fine. They've got a desire to stop gambling. They're more than welcome, but they don't particularly need the 12 steps.
Interesting.
And so the people that I talk to in Gamblers Anonymous are the hopeless addicts. And we try and take the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to GA, and we've done that with limited success. But if you're a hopeless addict, that's where the solution is, isn't it? In having spiritual experience, there's nothing you can't stay away from a bet one day at a time. And that's really what I love about CA, because the critical mass of people, you walk into a meeting these days and people say, get a sponsor, get a big book, go through the work, have your own experience, have a spiritual awakening, live in 10, 11, 12, living the triangle. And I love that message.
Amazing. Thank you, Steve. And our last question for today, our question 12. What do you want your higher power to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
That's an interesting question. Probably say something like, I bet you didn't think you'd end up here, Steve, did you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that would be fair to say that I wouldn't. You know, the first 30 years of my life was a complete car crash. It was chaotic. And the next 32 years, I've really spent putting it right. You know, and I'd like to say I'm in that position spiritually, and that is where I'm probably going to say thank you to God. You know, and God knows this, obviously, but I'd be saying thank you to God is that you gave me the power to put this right. All those bad memories that I created in the first 30 years, you know, obviously I can't change what I did. I can't change the events.
Of course.
All those bad memories I've now put right, and I've left people in the main with good memories about me, you know, good memories from themselves. And I've worked in a positive way in people's life. I'm not the nicest guy in the world, it would be fair to say, but I am a decent guy.
Yeah.
You know, I'll do you a good turn rather than a bad turn.
Yeah.
That's why I'd be saying thank you to God. You know, thank you for entering my heart and showing me a different way of life. I genuinely thought that you had to be in pain to live in this world. I thought this world was a painful experience. So those first 5 years, 94 to 99, when the spiritual, I wasn't treating the spiritual malady, the malady got worse and I was just in more and more pain. But the sad thing is, I thought that was the way I had to live. I genuinely believe that everybody who lived in this world lived in that kind of pain that I was in, even though when I looked around the rooms, my experience was telling me, you know, that they don't seem to be that. And when I asked people go, no, we don't live in that pain, Steve. But I didn't believe them.
Yeah.
Because if you're not doing what I'm doing, I don't believe you. Simple as that. And then God and the program and the people in the program showed me this way. So I suppose, you know, after God has taken the mickey out of me, I'm sure I'll be saying thank you so much. You know, thank you. And can I come in?
Yeah.
Do I have to go around the back?
I have to thank you, Steve. It's been a really, really wonderful recording. You've come at this with so much insight and wisdom and wit. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for being my guest today on 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
No, thank you. It's been my complete privilege to be here. And, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-Step Recovery Program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-Step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not for profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.